Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on invisible entanglements, art, distant connections, and biofeedback. My name is Cristina Albu, and I am an art historian and educator working at University of Missouri, Kansas City. I'm currently developing a book project which charts the history of artists' creative uses of biofeedback in order to generate effective modes of nonverbal communication. And I'd like to start by thanking Victoria for inviting me to convene this panel with some dream speakers and organizing an astounding series of events for the Telluric Vibrations Festivals. This time last year, I imagined I would be spending the summer of 2020 traveling to artist studios, to neuroscience labs in order to conduct interviews for my book research. And little did I know that some of these conversations would actually move into the online sphere, and I'll get a chance to organize this panel. I'm delighted to moderate today's discussions, which bring together neuroscientist Suzanne Dikker, musical composer David Rosenboom, and media artists Nina Sobel and Victoria Vesna. Together, we'll be discussing physical and psychic entanglements, which typically remain beneath the visible surface. Despite their invisibility, these kinds of relationships are significant and complex, and they shape the way we think and react towards others and our environment. And I came up with this concept of entanglement because I think it's one of those terms that has become very prominent, both in the fields of the humanities and in sciences. It has been so for a period of time because it's associated with particle physics, with quantum physics, and with the interconnections that exist between quantum particles. It's also a concept that has come up a lot in discussions about new materialism in the context of philosophy, especially in relation to distributed modes of agency. And I think it's a term that already acquires certain scientific connotations that are much more precise, but it's also highly metaphorical and poetic in nature. It's a term that references interconnections that are established among us, and it denotes a contingent state, a condition of embroilment in webs of matter and information, which may evolve in highly unpredictable ways. So I'll start today's panel by offering an introduction to intersections between art and biofeedback. I'm going to offer a little bit of historical background, then proceed to brief descriptions of the projects that have been developed by the artists and the neuroscientists that is part of this panel, so that we can move smoothly to the discussion session. So that's the plan. Since their first experimental uses in the 1950s, biofeedback techniques have drawn the attention of both artists and scientists. Hailed for their therapeutic and aesthetic potential, they have generated an interest in processes of self-regulation of bodily and mental processes. In the midst of counterculture movements of the late 1960s, calling for changes in individual and social consciousness, these techniques gradually grew in popularity. In the early 1970s, portable biofeedback machines were devised to bring these techniques outside of the lab and make them available to meditation groups, which were exploring multiple ways of attaining alpha brainwaves, these low frequency brainwaves. While popular interest in biofeedback declined in the 1980s, these techniques have made a significant comeback in conjunction with the design of easy-to-use EEG headsets, the development of hyperscanning techniques, and the growing preoccupations with attaining mental balance. Collaborations between artists and scientists have expanded the possibilities of biofeedback. All the speakers on today's panel have explored the social implications of biofeedback, connecting this technique to increasingly complex scenarios that account for the way we modulate our relations to others, the way we seek mental balance. David is a musical composer, writer, and educator known for his pioneering work in experimental music. He's also the author of Biofeedback and the Arts, the first book that charts the use of this technological medium in an art context. And in this text, David insightfully notes that artists will increasingly adopt a system-oriented perspective to art making, by staging information energy exchange rituals. And I think there's a lot of foresight in that statement. In 1970, David created Ecology of the Skin, a participatory work in which 10 people had their neural and heart rhythms monitored as they attempted to attain a relaxed state of mind as a group. David designed his own alpha brainwave detector and correlated low-frequency brain oscillations with sounds that would gradually enable participants to attain an increasing degree of internal balance. And David saw these biofeedback rituals not only as occasions for practicing mindfulness, but also as aesthetic experiences that can prompt and enhance the awareness of systems that surpass physical boundaries. And he draws attention to the ecological relations that are contingent on people's ability to sense imbalances in their environment and in their bodies and identify possibilities for restoring equilibrium. In 2014, David collaborated with cognitive scientist Tim Mullen on staging a performance called Ringing Minds, which was part of the Whitney Museum of American Art retrospective of his work. Using hyperscanning technology, he monitored the interbrain synchronization of 4 audience members who were listening to 2 musical performers who were improvising a composition in relation to the oscillations of their brainwave frequency. And the musical piece evolved in conjunction with the concomitant modulation of mental states. Images of colorful ripples were projected in the background, and they resonated with the transformations in neural and sound oscillations. So I'm going to play a clip so that you get a better sense of the work and the sound of it. Nina Sobel is a video and performance artist whose work has been acknowledged not only for its engagement with feminist issues and the breaking of social taboos, but also for its subtle outlook on technologically mediated forms of communication. As an artist, she embraces the use of technology as a means of creating an effective space meant to surpass self or socially imposed boundaries between individuals. These are her own words. In 1973, Nina collaborated with engineer Mike Trivich on designing a cybernetic system based on an electroencephalograph, an oscilloscope, 2 video cameras, and a television set. Titled Brainwave Drawings, this project permitted participants to view a composite of their live video images, as well as abstract renderings of their respective brainwaves. If participants simultaneously reached alpha brainwave state, the two squiggly lines that you can see in the images on the right, they formed a full circle, they converged, and they thus represented the oneness of the psychic state attained by the participants. The interactive scenario was complicated by the fact that the participants had access to a switch that permitted them to put a stop to the video recording and then play it back and reflect on their participation. In the late 1990s, Nina created a series of web seances based on a chatterbot application, which permitted her to extend the nervous entanglements of performers to a global level. For Memory, Dream, Fantasy, she created in 1999, Nina invited two people, one located in Banff and one in New York, to have their neural oscillations and heart rhythms monitored as they contemplated responses to meditation cues that Nina had prepared. One of them was imagine a planet of your own creation. These cues were also made available to online visitors of the project, and as the interaction unfolded, the collective presence of the web audience was made visible via a rich texture of moss that was accumulating over the images. You can see on the left over there. Another web seance that she created is titled Solar Wind, Within the Sound and the Moon. And it's a work that connected two performers in the Château de Sassy in France with artists that were located on a boat in the English Channel at the time of the solar eclipse of 1999. The brainwave rhythms of the participants in France were monitored as they engaged in creating 1-minute drawings every 5 minutes over the course of an hour. And throughout this process, they were contemplating their connections to people that were witnessing the eclipse in other parts of the world. I'm going to play a short video documentation. And as images start, you'll see the abstract composite image on the screen that is formed out of the neural frequency of the two participants who are engaged in drawing processes and meditation in between the drawing intervals. Victoria Vesna is a media artist who engages in mediating planetary communication. She creates immersive environments based on technological interfaces that generate mindfulness and ecological awareness. In her eclectic practice, including performances, installations, and online databases, Victoria pursues interdisciplinary inquiries into consciousness, identity, and group behavior, be it the behavior of animals or humans. Reflecting on the dialogue between the arts, sciences, and the humanities more broadly, Victoria affirms that artists embrace the role of bridging and synthesizing many worlds while composing something else, composing something different. In 2012, she started collaborating with neuroscientist Mark S. Cohen on a performative installation focused on the neural attunement established between participants contemplating their state of mind through observations of sounds and color corresponding to their neural frequency. And the project acquired another meaningful dimension when Victoria designed LED-lit octopus crowns that participants could wear during the performance. This prop conferred a sense of empowerment to the participants and made them more aware of their bodily presence, especially as you can see the limbs of these octopus crowns that are dangling across their shoulders. It also invited them to reflect on decentralized modes of models of consciousness, the ones that may be associated perhaps with the mental activity of octopuses as their nervous systems are spread throughout their bodies. So here's a short clip of the performance.
How long is it?
Over the course of this year, Victoria has devised another work which engages with the notion of planetary consciousness. It's called Alien Stardust, and it started as a project inspired by the collection of meteorites of the Natural History Museum in Vienna, and it was also inspired by the radio signals that are picked up by the meteor radar station, which is located on the roof of the museum. And when the exhibition came to an early halt due to the COVID-19 crisis, Victoria decided to take the work into the online environment by creating a series of guided meditations, which are structured around animations of meteorites that collapse in 6 different parts of the world. So here is the one that collapsed in Antarctica. So it's a short animation from it. And the meditation also includes a multi-layered acoustic landscape, which integrates multiple sounds, and some of them correspond to the number of deaths caused by COVID-19. And you won't be able to hear the sound in this animation, but I wanted to alert you to that. And you can actually be part of this guided meditation tomorrow, starting with 9 a.m., since it's part of the Telluric Vibrations Festival. The work builds on concepts of virality, both in terms of the spread of meteorite dust and actual viruses. And I think it also relates to that concept in terms of the neural attunement that is established at a distance between online participants who are engaged in meditation. Suzanne Dikker is a neuroscientist exploring questions pertaining to the relationship between brain-to-brain synchrony and subjective feelings of connectedness. She also looks into the interconnections between neural attunement, learning, and memory retention. And she's dedicated to bringing science outside of the confines of the lab. And not only does this enable the collection of large amounts of data, which can improve the accuracy of research findings over the course of time, but it has the benefit of bringing experimental technologies and methodologies into the public eye, subjecting them to scrutiny and unveiling the contingent nature of scientific data. Suzanne has collaborated with performance and visual artists, as well as dancers and musicians, in order to enable participants to experiment and to experience visual and sound patterns that correspond to their neural frequency. Mutual Wave Machine is an installation she designed together with visual artist and programmer Matthias Ostrich. It tests the ability of visitors to reach neural attunement through developing connection strategies while interacting with the work. And I'm going to show a clip that portrays this interaction with the work, and I'm going to provide some brief explanations about what happens. Participants sit in an immersive capsule space. They're wearing Bluetooth headsets. They're measuring their hearing. They look into each other's eyes, sometimes hold hands. Some participants nod eventually switching. You can see the three halves of the capsule, they light up as synchronicity with the neural frequency of the two participants. There are also sound streams that correspond to the individual neural activity of participants. They are played simultaneously with obvious harmonization of sound stream. There's a very strong visual component as well that is represented by array patterns that appear against the screens. And they are forming flickering portraits of each of the participants in the work. And they also have to do with this desire for mirror images, as well as with the fact that this feeling of connectedness also has a lot to do with subjective experience. And this is part of the testing ground for this work, which measures the scientific data with people's reflections on how strongly connected they felt to the work. And the participants fill in questionnaires before and after the performance, and neural data is gathered as they interact. One more work. Together with Matthias Wistrich, Suzanne also created a series of works titled Harmonic Dissonances, which test relations of attunement as well as dissonance developed between participants who move within a hexagonal perimeter of interaction. As they walk, participants have their neural and heart rhythms monitored, and they observe on the floor these fluid formations. They're very colorful, and each participant has a certain color corresponding to his movements in space and to his neural frequency. And you can notice divergences and convergences between these fluid patterns as the participants interact with this field. And Suzanne was thinking about individual and collective agency, and participants are allowed to maximize their attunement, but they can also step out of this environment, of this perimeter of interaction. Here's a short clip. With this, we are going to move to the discussion session, and I've prepared a couple of questions for the panelists, and I'll make sure that we leave a couple of minutes also for discussions from the audience. Let's start with this question that has to do with the present context. I think it's inevitable not to bring it into discussion because it invites us to ponder our connections with people that are situated far away from us. And it has certainly set its imprint also on creative practices, both for artists and scientists. Mail and telematic art have clearly flourished during this period of time. And surely scientists have also come up with creative alternatives for some of their experimental work, which involves face-to-face interaction with human subjects. So I wonder how your practices have been impacted by the COVID-19 period, and I wonder if you think that these new modes of production, new modes of collaboration in some cases, might have lasting impacts on the way you envision the role of the artists and scientists within society.
Well, I definitely think COVID-19 has brought about an increased sense of connectivity. How many times have you received some form of communication only to say, I wasn't just thinking of you? No, I don't think physical proximity is required for the merging of consciousnesses, but a little help from a social feedback app I'm working on couldn't hurt. I don't know whether that answers the question. What number is that?
I think we've relied so much on physical encounters when we come to expect that we connect in a more vivid manner with others when we are in close proximity. And I think Nina is telling us that she suspects that connections at a distance can still be very strong. Yeah, the thoughts on this and on the technological mediation of these connections during this period of time.
I'd like to hear what the social feedback app is that you're developing, Nina. If that's
I'm working on it.
Okay. David, sorry.
Yeah, well, I wonder if it'd be a good idea to not share screens so we can see each other.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Little bit distracted over there, and I'm.
See, then we can be more connected.
Yeah, the setting has disappeared.
There we go.
Disappeared. All right.
Okay.
I received some help from a distance. It's a thing, so I need to tell you.
That's great. Thank you for that. First of all, thank you for that wonderful summary of all of our work. There's such great stuff going on that everybody is doing. It's really amazing. And I know one of the things that you were asking us to think about also were there socio-political factors related to how this work has expanded so much. And I think there probably are, but I think it's a rather large sort of scope of changes going on in the world that that might help motivate it. I mean, what enables it is there was a sudden spurt of technological advances that made the technology much more accessible, less costly, and also development of new analytical techniques beyond just the hardware and software, and so on. So, but there's we seem to be moving into this period where even out of the 80s and the 90s and so on, where there's a sort of conflict of how to respond to the notion of sort of universality versus difference. Mm-hmm. And that we started to think more and more globally. We wanted to think about a one world and so on. And then we come into the conflicts of people who don't want to think that way, who want to think of division. And part of that having to do with sort of fear of difference and being able to let go enough to open to a sense of openness that is absolutely necessary in order to get past these boundaries that we build around ourselves, the isolation of the self and what that means in terms of consciousness, and then how one goes inside and learns things and then comes out, and how one then can reintegrate that with the social. And that's changing art in general. And it's certainly changing music in terms of moving away from the iconic, creation of the icon by an artist that's isolated from its realization in performance and how that's all going away and being merged. And then all of a sudden we are challenged by being absolutely physically isolated. So now what do? Now we have this soup of boundaries to cross over. And I think, you know, physical proximity certainly helps, but the ways that we can mediate our physical being in a way that is transmittable with technology that we have is still very primitive in a certain way. It's, you know, we're just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of the totality of the person, the totality of the being that can be transmitted through some other channel, through some other time-space manifestation. So it's the connectivity, the desire for connectivity is huge. The desire to understand difference is absolutely essential now. And this work involves building openness, and there's a fear of openness too, because if you get too open, you can't ignore the environmental problems. And so, you know, maybe there's also something to get across that has to do with and sort of opposition. We shouldn't be too open, otherwise we have too many difficult things to deal with. You know what I mean? So, and right now the multi-layered crises just make us grapple with this every day, you know, and it's massive. Sorry, I'm talking a lot, but
it's a difficult balance to reach between individuality and collectivity and global dimensions and the local aspects. And I think, you know, that's one of those complex problems that face not only composers, not only people in visual arts, but scientists as well. So Suzanne, do you have any thoughts to share on that? Because I think it plays a really important role in how you approach people's reflections on their subjective experience, yet you are also a scientist and you're working with data. So I think there are lots of challenges that you face in terms of the methodologies you use and the implications of this process of using neural data.
Yeah, so in a way, like the situation is a little bit ironic because we've been arguing for together with people who are here to bring neuroscience research out of like laboratory environments that are not face-to-face, to go into real worlds and like mimic more realistic social interactions, which we've assumed are primarily face-to-face interactions in terms of what we get out of them. So if you want to model the social brain, you have to actually also go out there. And now we're in a situation, obviously, where that's, at least from a research perspective, it's not going to be very easy to do those kinds of studies of physical proximity. But it does raise interesting questions of what is needed for social interaction. Like Nina is developing I want to hear what it is, but like the social feedback app. And we're also, we're constantly looking for some sort of enrichment of this limited technology that we have here. And that's in terms of, so Nina mentioned that we're, we can still be socially close, but there are some very basic limitations to the way that we can interact. So if you take Zoom, for example, there's, you can't have eye contact, which is pretty primary to, a lot of the social cues that we convey to each other. There's a delay in our communication. It's not necessarily noticeable if you're, when you're having a conversation, but it's very noticeable to anybody who's like attended, for example, a Zoom birthday party or something like that, where you're trying to sing happy birthday. You realize how you cannot do a lot of the social coordination that we're used to doing in the kind of timing that we have. And we know that from a neuroscience perspective, it's this kind of timing properties of our environment and our tendency of our brains to tag on to rhythmic properties is very relevant to social interactions. There's important social cues that are quote unquote hidden in the timing of your joint action. And so that probably leads to us having a suboptimal experience, but we're still like trying to, and it might be why we get exhausted by the end of it. And one thing that I think doing the artistic kind of practice that a lot of us here are doing, where you're like gathering brain data from multiple people or heart rate or other physiological data and examining, the similarity of the data streams and visualizing or sonifying those points of similarity actually, for me, allows me often to see the challenges more clearly with respect to how important the actual rhythmic alignment is in these social interactions. So, looking at David, when David mentions, for example, questions around difference and dissimilarity or opposition, we're automatically stepping into a lot of our work. We're assuming that the same is good. Synchrony is what you want. You want to have this similarity. But once you start sonifying or visualizing it, if you, for example, have a social network and there's one dude that's just kind of like visually on the outside, you're like, hey, who do I really want to be? Do I want to be the hub in the center of it all that like harmonizes with the rest? Or do I really want to be the person or the note or the visual that like brings in, richness to what we're seeing? And I think for me personally, just the practice of trying to like express it through these visual or sound patterns helps me think about those kinds of questions, also from a purely neuroscientific perspective and a societal perspective as well. Do we need to all be the same, or what are the prerequisites to engage in the conversation? Sorry, it was a long-winded answer, but I hope I sort of touched upon what you were asking for.
On that and these principles of collaboration and competition that exist in the social world and that are made evident in this neural connective realm as well. And I think there are lots of concerns that are being raised today about invisible cognitive labor that is performed knowingly or unknowingly by participants in the social media realm. And there have been lots of concerns that are raised about the complexity and global networks that we're all part of. And I think we see the results of this right now in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of facing the fires in California. And we think about neurofeedback as a technology that has great therapeutic potential, but we are also aware, I think you all are, of the fact that it can also be used in a negative manner and creating imbalances. And also, as you're pointing out, in terms of this alignment with others and who do you want to be in projecting our sense of identity in relation to others. And this can have controlling effects on our behavior, whether we are aware of this through neural feedback or not. So I wonder to what degree the participants in your project maintain a sense of individual agency in this neural entanglement. To what degree do you feel that they gain a sense that they can influence this flow at an individual level, and they are not just part of this web that is very fluid and over which they have no control whatsoever, right? What is the degree of agency of individuals in this process? So I wonder if you have any reflections on that. And I know the concept of agency comes up in Suzanne's work with harmonic dissonance, but I think it's also pertinent to other panelists' practice as well. So any thoughts on agency? I'm not sure if we lost Victoria or not. Victoria, are you still there? No, she needs to head to another panel. So I wanted to make sure that I can engage her while she's still here. So any thoughts on individual agency and also the agency of the artist? I think that's an important aspect, because in many of these projects, the artists are not necessarily performers. And I think this is an attribute of many works that focus on biofeedback. David is involved as a performer, for example, in Bringing Minds. So maybe you have some insight to offer on your agency in that process and the agency of the participants wearing the EEG headsets.
Well, if I was to talk about that piece relates to lots of other pieces where the idea is to deal with more than one. Let's say when we talk about agency, that's something that if participants are able, if circumstances enable them to be involved continuously, to try to work on developing, getting into this as a discipline rather than, a transitory experience, it inevitably leads to this sense of where is the agency and what is the agency. Because like, for example, if you've got something in a fairly complex sonic environment like there's in that piece, sometimes the initial experiences are, well, boy, it feels like the system is responding to me in a certain way, but do I know if that's really true or not? How can I really, can I really know about that? And then you pass through that phase maybe to a phase where, well, I'm riding a very thin line between being an initiator of action and being part of something that's larger than myself. And I'm part of this big thing, and it's hard to zoom out and see what that big thing really is as a separate receiver of it, because you're in the middle of it, right? And it's a fascinating process to go through. It's very difficult to be objective about it and say, well, exactly this happened and exactly that happened. And I firmly believe in a kind of there's a fundamental unpredictability that cannot be eliminated, right? There's a what I call deviant resonances, things that pop up like squeezing a balloon, and it pops out this way and that way and that way, and that's happening in these pieces. And so it's hard to tell sometimes exactly what's happening. So, well, is that thing going this way because I really did this or I listened to that? And in my piece, it's really about, well, it's about many things, but one of the things it's about is listening as performance. The whole idea that you're now a performer by being engaged in active imaginative listening, right? And so the responses will be more or less emergent, semi-automatic, but sort of emergent. And then to complicate it more by using hyperscanning and now a group of 4 people in that piece, and we're extracting resonances that spread across the group of 4, and so the detection of how much any particular individual is contributing to that resonance is being detected becomes a parameter of the composition, becomes a parameter of the performance. And we had that mapped out in the visual display. So you could see across the x-axis of that display would be, if it's more to this side, then the resonance, more energy is coming from this side of the group. Or if it's in the middle, it's pretty well distributed and across. I look forward. That piece opened up a whole lot of things that I would like to continue to work on, and getting and in an environment where people can actually practice, because there's a real discipline question, right? I mean, it's very
duration is really
and
in all your works, and some of you actually time it, and some of you want to leave it more open-ended. I know Victoria wanted to leave it more open-ended rather than set a specific time.
Right, and I value both. Where someone has never had any experience with this before, and they are in this environment, and we see what happens, and then also at the other end where people can actually spend lots of time developing something as they experience it more and more and more. They're both really interesting, right?
Nina, do you have any thoughts on agency and the unpredictability of these processes you were engaged with? And I know you're a very close observer of the interactions between participants, and you are literally, someone who's adopt this role of explaining to them how the technology works and installing the electrodes, and you're spending time with the participants for a certain duration before the performance, and you're also closely monitoring the whole process. So do you have any thoughts on the temporal duration of this and any unpredictable events that have happened as a result of this neural entanglements that are mapped out in your practice?
Well, I've always incorporated physical and mental components, or rather an embodied process of cognitive perception. I can only remember back in the 1999 eclipse, drawing with Anne Bean on the boat and Anders Manson, that I was completely focused and and well, I can only say that the brainwave installations that brought me the most joy were used the living room couch, and people were encouraged to sit closely as was comfortable together. And they saw themselves as a representation of their brainwaves dissolved over their faces, and they perceived of their external and internal portrait, and were instructed on how to use the equipment and learn how to read the encephalogram. And people need to be personally engaged with this process, and watching an electrical signal is not going in and out of the circle is not as much fun as watching yourself and someone else making it. And I myself found the same thing. And
And I think, you know, this agency that you gave to the participants to actually switch off the video recording and to take over control over what they are seeing, I think that was a really interesting component of the project in terms of enabling this reflection on the process in terms of a temporal distance, even short temporal distance from the actual entanglement that they were witnessing on screen in real time. So I think that's one way in which you provided this engaged role for the viewer.
Yes, it was very important for me to have them be physically engaged as well as mentally. Have an internal and external portrait was very important for me. And well, my observations of participants interpersonally creating brainwave drawings and coming to the aha moment and simultaneously sharing that perception of a higher consciousness has certainly inspired the development of my work. It has also led me to the realization that uplifting the spiritual energy leads to higher consciousness. So I think that we need to present sensitive works that uplift consciousness and in ourselves and with our participants and ourselves as a participant. That there's a seamlessness between the two.
And I think with that topic of consciousness, I think we can think of it in various ways. We can think about it in terms of, you know, the mental process, the social aspects of it. And I think nowadays we tend to think more and more about ecology and the role of consciousness in this. And I cannot help but bring Gregory Bateson's work into conversation here, and his whole concept of the ecology of mind, which he defined in terms of a system of ideas whose boundaries are not restricted by our bodies, and whose survival actually depends on a certain degree of openness to variation, to transformation over the course of time. And I think this is something that David was bringing up in conversation at the very beginning of our discussion. So with this being said, I wonder if there is a potential for neurofeedback technology to be used to sensitize us to environmental concerns, and whether this is a pathway that any of you have envisioned. I know it's an element that has come up in David's works, in musical compositions that relate to moments of ecological crisis, even in the 1970s. So to what extent do you think neurofeedback can play a role in the midst of an environmental crisis?
Well, we would hope we had more power to affect it than we probably really do, but Bateson used to also encourage everybody to think about what he called the ideas that connect. And that phrase, the ideas that connect, has stuck with me ever since hearing. I was fortunate to experience him lecturing, and that if you just keep that in your mind and you start looking at everything, you can start to find them. You find these ideas that connect, and then sometimes you can pursue them and see, well, what can my practice do that somehow underlines or highlights these ideas that connect that you can find. And I think that back to the concept of openness, that if what we do encourages that, then it brings people into a state of mind that allows them to see things that they would otherwise want to ignore. So once you can't ignore it, then you start to think about, if you want to have agency in the world, what do you do about it? So it's hard to say, well, I can make a piece of music that will change the world. I can't, probably, right? But we could say, and people have tried, and some things have an effect, some things don't. But on the other hand, we might as well do something. So if we can make some sort of overt connection, if we can highlight the connections, or we can try to make something that is meaningful that way, then I think that's good. And I think the degree to which we look at connectedness in all of this is probably maybe one of the most powerful ways, because the environment, appreciation of the environment, highlights our connectedness to the world in general and our effect on that world. And so it's worth doing. I think it's worth trying to do what we can do.
I think we can like leverage this like fascination, especially when it comes to brain art. Like, a lot of people are extremely fascinated with, seeing their own brain waves, or like or visualizing somehow the neural synchrony, even though it's often a lot of noise. It doesn't. And so I'm personally fascinated by the fact that people are so fascinated with like the power, the idea that you can like move or like do something with your brain, whereas like, and actually you have much better tools by just using your hands, which are also operated by your brain. But it's great to have this, like, to capture the attention of people. So we use it for engagement with a scientific process. You put something on people's heads, they show your own brain activity, you show a visualization, you move a card with your brain synchrony, so they're fascinated and you have their attention. But it also then like that kind of maybe gimmicky, like somewhat gimmicky aspect of the work can also be leveraged then to put people in front of each other who might not otherwise necessarily engage, and like try to find moments of connection around conversations that could be ecology or any kind of social change that you might want to like motivate in these conversations, because you're putting people in situations where they feel a sense of nudity, and like because somehow you're like seeing, underneath the clothes, underneath the skin, or they have that feeling that they are. And so that puts them in a position of vulnerability, and where, for example, we ask people to have eye contact with each other for a while, and they'll do it in the context of this like performance. But that also then has the consequence that they will, they might open up to each other better, or like be more, inclined to, talk, maybe, get like lose their guard in these kinds of conversations, which could be, the effect of those could be hopefully more longer lasting than just those 5 minutes that we're putting them in that context. And like the sense of agency, to just go back to that, that's so like leveraging that also, because I was very worried, like our first work, people were sitting still and there was something like synchrony happening behind them, but we didn't have any kind of direct there was no direct relationship that they could perceive between their brainwave synchrony and what they were doing. And a lot of what we do, it's kind of abstract, and so and they can interpret it after the fact. So with one work, the compatibility racer, which was with Lauren Silbert from Princeton, it's you move a card with synchrony, and there we were very worried that people would notice that a lot of a lot of the data might be noise or maybe not meaningful, and so they're like, wait a minute, we're connecting but we're not actually moving it. But then we're realizing that it's the other way around. People will impose causality on the moving card, and they will feel as if they were actually connected. So they're we went faster, so we were in sync, which is exactly right, because I felt really in sync with you right at that very moment. So that I thought that keeps fascinating me about that really strong agency imposition on the work, where the data sometimes, I don't know why, things are happening as they're happening, in the sonification or visualization.
Fascinating how we construct these theories of mind on the spur of the moment, and we try to establish causation, and the unpredictable element, however, sometimes completely contradicts the scenarios, the patterns that we presume might exist between cause and effect. And I think in all of your works, what comes through is that you're thinking about the self not only in terms of the mind, even though you're using neurofeedback in your works. I think whether it has to do with movement, with the measuring of the heartbeat, with the awareness of the resonance of sound within your environment, there is this constant reminder of the physicality of those processes, which are not completely ethereal, which are not completely restricted to the variability of the brain itself, but it's constant connections to all these various other variables that are materially contingent. We only have 3 minutes left, unfortunately, and I was watching the chat box to see if we had any questions from the audience. We don't, unfortunately, but we don't have much time left either. So I'd like to thank you all for joining the panel, and I wish we had more time for a more prolonged conversation about these issues, because it's such a rich field which raises so many questions that are really, really significant, especially in times like this, when we consider more and more the elements of connectivity that bring us closer to others, and the elements of connectivity that may actually endanger us as well, in terms of this dense network of information that we traverse right now. With this being said, since we only have 2 minutes, I thought I would play a clip of Nina's Unseen Unheard work, a video that she conceived during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to share the screen again, and this will be our epilogue for today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The internet works. can feel the energy. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
so
you,
much.
Cristina. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
And thank
everybody.
you, David and Suzanne and Victoria.
Thank you, David.
I think
Great
we
to
are
be with you
aligned at
all.
this point. So.
Likewise.
I see situations where people come together
Drink
and
have to actually also go out.
shared humanity.
Offline, actually, but we can
Difference
keep our conversation.
as human beings together, not as individuals, become all that matter. Outside of political, cultural, or social belief systems, people want to help. That's in a sense of, in a time of emergency. If we can get hold of that heightened awareness that arises from these triggers and where it resides, we can make it possible to enter that space more often.
Beautiful. Yeah.